Hey everybody, today's guest is Jen Razavi, better known as Jen Pop from the band the Bombpops. She picked the song Notre Dame to discuss today from their latest album Death in Venice Beach. She talked about how a producer can elevate songs, the importance of imagery in the songs that she writes. Jen talks about how Notre Dame is a love song, but it's not an overt love song. She tells us of her love for Alkaline Trio and why they're her favorite band. And she went on to tell my producer Chris a story full of crazy and spooky coincidences dealing with the bubonic plague and the Bombpops album release that she meant to tell me earlier in the episode, but forgot, and then I hung up, and that's the last time I hang up on an interview before I'm certain it's surely over. Hope you enjoy it. Stay tuned.
Hey, have you heard? Krista makes a podcast. Hey, have you heard? Krista makes a podcast. Hey, have you heard? Krista makes a podcast. Hey, have you heard? Krista makes a podcast.
We recorded Death in Venice Beach in June and July of 2019, right after we got done with that Punk and Jublick tour in Europe. We flew to Denver, Colorado to record with Chris Fogel from the Gamuts at his studio called Black and Bloom.
Right.
And so
love Chris,
yeah.
Good dude.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. I went to that New Year's show with the Gamuts, Les and Jake.
Yes.
That was fun.
Known Chris for years.
He's wonderful. And has a lot to do with kind of what the Bombpops, I don't know, just elevating, I think, quite a bit of our song structure and songwriting. He's always been a huge influence to me as a songwriter for multiple reasons. One, he's an incredible storyteller. He can tell a story and put himself in a position he's never been in and tell it so beautifully from that view. I mean, like, he has a song called Love Suicidal on the album Parts.
When you read on, you will find the last words that I'll ever write are meant only for you. I saved up all.
And it's about like two teenage lesbian girls who can't be in love because of their families and their church. I'm gathering they're from a religious families, and they've written these love notes to each other and how they can't live without each other. And I know for a fact Chris Fogel's never been a teenage lesbian who contemplated suicide. But I'll be damned if he didn't make me believe that he was. It's just so beautiful. And that whole record, I could talk every single one of those songs has that kind of storytelling in some way.
Yeah, well, and your record sounds great. You know, the production on it, it's definitely a step up from the previous record. So going back to the song, so do you remember where you were when you wrote it and when you wrote it?
Yeah, and that's why this song specifically, when you asked me to do this podcast, I was like, I've got to talk about this song because it's, first of all, it was one of the last songs written before, of the batch of songs on my end before we went into the studio. So kind of finished writing it before we went on tour. I came home from work and I saw Notre Dame in Flames on the TV. And I was living at my dad's house for a moment. I had a transitional phase last year where I was like, okay, reset. I wanted to make a career change, wanted to do all these things, reset at my dad's house for like 8 months. So I was there at the time. And I remember seeing that on the TV and it made me want to cry. First of all, I've never actually visited Notre Dame. Second of all, it's just a fucking church on fire. Like if you think about it for what it is. And I say that because every day people die on the news. Every day, during this whole, even this pandemic, I don't just look at the news and feel compelled to cry. And so I kind of my first reaction was like, whoa, that's fucked up that every day I hear there's a mass shooting and I don't cry. But I see this beautiful cathedral on flames and I want to cry. But I saw that and I booked it upstairs and finished the song because I had found the imagery that I needed to complete this song. And it was Notre Dame on fire. And I say I booked it upstairs. I booked it upstairs and then I dicked around on Instagram for a minute before I like settled in. And what I saw was a post by Michelle Obama that day. And she had written this thing on Instagram. And it was just, her thoughts on Notre Dame and how, throughout the centuries, this had been a sacred place for people to come and, have hope, during the plague, during war, during, multiple things throughout history. This has been a sacred place for people to come. And I'm not a religious person at all, but I do love like symbolism and mythology.
So what I took away from it, just reading the lyrics and hearing the songs. So obviously, Notre Dame is the focal point in the imagery, but to me, this feels like, and correct me if I'm way off base, it feels like a love song. Was that where it was born out of?
It is completely a love song. And
and that's cool because it doesn't overtly come there's no love isn't in there, or you left me and blah blah blah, like a typical maybe pop punk love song. So there's definitely but there's definitely undertones of that. I felt that this was a love song. So yeah, talk about that a little bit.
I'm really happy that you noticed that, because on this album, like all of my songs are actually, for the most part, love songs, but I didn't want them to be. I wanted to disguise them in things, because I wanted to I just kept thinking about Chris Fogel and just different ways to tell stories, and using imagery and other art that I had seen to become the metaphor for my situation, which I didn't even want to talk. I don't even want to talk about or write a love song that way. So that was kind of the goal, and I'm happy that came across. But to this song I wanted to write, I had that first verse already. That was the first thing I had. It seems like things have gotten worse. You're the black cat on my path. You've crossed me and I'm cursed.
Well, it seems like things are getting worse. You're the black cat on my path. You crossed me and I'm cursed. I'm a victim and you're the plague.
And so, but the main idea was that you meet sometimes people and they don't come around that often. And when they do, they stick with you forever. And you meet them and you're like, oh, you're my people, in an instant. And I've known you before. I've been around here. I've been here before with you once or several times over. And I think you experience that with friends. But when you meet a love story like that, it's of the universe. It's of the cosmos. It's centuries old, but it also is just such a flash in time. It's worth this thing that time and space don't matter. It transcends through all of that. So that's the idea. And I couldn't wrap my head around how am I going to write this song. So that lyric about the black cat and crossing the path and the plague, that was my first one, because also it was kind of a tormented type of love. It's it just became really complicated and very apparent, probably wasn't going to work out, but very, a thing. And, the thing about a black cat crossing your path, it's a bad luck omen, but there's some also good luck omens. I don't know if you research it. It's weird. It's well, really, what is it? But, I think it's most associated with a bad omen. And, in the time of the plague, they say that one reason for the bubonic plague was they were getting rid of cats because they were associated with witchcraft, and they're burning people at the stakes and all this, but they're also getting rid of cats, and cats also controlled rat populations in town. So killing off these cats at the same time when this the plague was spreading that way through fleas. So it's this thing. It's that was the imagery that I wanted to start with. So I was married to this thing about the imagery of the plague.
Well, and that's where just this first lyric here is why I thought it was, a love song about a relationship. I'm a victim and you're the plague. There's no cure and I'm left conscious, but I'm dying in decay. Just that whole imagery right there. Now, did you write this song yourself, lyrically and musically, or did you bring it to the band and you collaborated?
I wrote the song myself, lyrically and musically as well, and that's kind of how we both operate, Polly and I. And then there are certain songs where if I'm missing a gap, I'll come to to the table or to the producer and ask for help lyrically. But and I did so more on like the last album, but this album I was really like, I can finish it. There's always, if I don't like something, there's a smarter way to say it. I'm gonna figure that out. It's like a puzzle, and I'm really into it. There's only one song on the album that I asked for Chris Fogel's help with it lyrically, and that was on the bridge of Radio Silence, where I was having such a hard time with it. I was like, Fogel, you're the guy. But
Well,
I have to mention, when you say musically, we did have 2 producers on this album, and Chris Fogel's engineer, producer, but so was Yotam Ben Horan from Useless ID.
Okay.
He was the producer on this album who worked with us before we got to the studio via voice memo. And that was a suggestion.
So like pre-production essentially?
Yeah, but he also came to Denver with us, and he was there the whole time with us, and he was heavily involved in afterwards, because we ended up having it mixed by the blasting room, and we actually ended up coming home from Denver and doing more and adding more. And
Okay.
so Yotam was there like from when we got ready to get, pre-production to after. And how I worked was I would send him a song, and he would send back what he would do. And we started off like before we decided to work with him, like I sent him 3 of my songs, and he sent me back 3 versions of like just altering stuff. And what I loved is I told him, don't sacrifice any lyrics. We can make them fit. If you have to rearrange them, that's fine. Sometimes I would be set like, this melody I don't want to sacrifice. Or sometimes I'd be like, this melody, I like it, but I feel like it could be better. Like, what should I do? So when I sent him these 3 songs, he sent back 2 versions of them. Notre Dame wasn't one of them. But, and like one of them made me cry. I was like, oh my God. He's like, yeah, your pre-chorus is actually your chorus. So if you just switch that, like your melody and your lyrics, like that's basically it. And he would also add in some chords that were not in my chord vocabulary.
And that's cool sometime to be able to have somebody do that, to look at it from the outside, because you don't realize you're so close to it. You're like, you wouldn't think that the pre-chorus and the chorus should be switched.
Yeah, and you also get married to those ideas.
Yeah,
and you can't attach from them. But with some of these songs, and I think in the past me would have been like, no, I don't know. I would have fought it more. In the end, I do want, our band always has the idea of like, whatever is the best for the song is going to happen. And I'm really proud of us for having that mentality, because I don't know. I think it took us a while to get there, and just working with other artists. And I just think that, and there's nothing wrong. There's no wrong way to do it. If that works for your band or it doesn't, like, there's no wrong way to do it.
You got into the studio. This is one of the later songs to be worked on. And the reason I was asking about Chris, this song has Bombpops written all over it. It's got your sound, the pop punk, female vocals, but it gets to the bridge, and I really heard gamuts. There's those minor chords there. Gets really weird for a second there. So did Chris have anything to do with that part of the song, or what did he bring to the production of this song in particular?
So for this song in particular, what we did, because we had 2 producers, and one of the reasons like Yotam and Fogel worked together really well during the pre-production, we also, when we got to Denver, had a week of pre-production before we started tracking. A lot of these songs, the band this time around, we didn't show to each other before pre-production, and that became, I felt like when we kind of did, we would get in demoitis, and I was like, I already have my demoitis. I don't want everyone to be married to their bass line or their drum part. Like, let's just wait till we get to these 2 producers that we've agreed to work with. That's what we are going to have them do, or work through.
Because most likely stuff's going to change.
Yeah, and I don't want people
working
to
with 2 guys.
People being like, I don't know, just bummed like that their part gets changed. So I'd rather so for Notre Dame, I remember that this song, Yotam helped me with that bridge. That was very much a Yotam bridge. Yotam 100%. I didn't have a bridge for it, and he was just like, I'm just feeling no use for a name. He just took it to no use for a name kind of thing, and I was like, yep, I want to do that. Let's do that. But the funny thing is, when we got with Fogel, they would more or less, like, watching them together was really interesting, because I love both of their sensibilities, and most of the time, either like Fogel would suggest something or Yotam would be suggesting, and something, and they'd be like, that's what I was going to do. They have the same, they throw in that same like splashy kind of, I don't know, a lot of the minor chords, a lot of these melody kind of slight alterations. And so for Chris Fogel, yeah, I believe on that song, it was mostly like Yo Tom, but they would be like, Fogel would be like, well, instead, what about, okay, just change this one chord, or it's like not as long or a little bit longer. So yes, there was Chris Fogel on that bridge, and Chris Fogel also helped me get to a good place in my voice with it. Like it starts slower than I'm usually like like kind of like jump. I don't know how you technically say it, but I don't know. I had a hard time at first singing it in the studio, and Chris Fogel gave me some mind tricks to like get myself low and kind of sultry in the beginning of it.
Right. So the song came late in the game. I don't recall you guys playing it on Punk and Drublick.
What's that?
I said I don't recall you guys playing it.
Oh my God! You don't recall us being there every day?
No. I said I don't recall you playing Notre Dame.
I was like, I thought you said I don't remember you guys. I was like, what the?
We have to leave this part in. You're probably thinking, how many drugs were you doing? Jesus Christ!
I was like,
no, of course.
I'm pretty sure.
Of course, I remember the Bombpops. That was one of the greatest tours we've ever done. For our listeners, it was the Punk and Drublick tour. It was us. No Effects, well, it was No Effects' tour. Bad Religion, Bombpops, Anti-Flag was out there with us. Who else? Lagwagon.
Uh-huh. And then us, we opened every day, and then there would be occasional, like Get Dead played some dates, Lillingtons played some dates, and Real Mackenzie's played some dates.
Yes, you just gave me my first real laugh of the day, and it's late here right now, so thank you, Jen. No, of course I remember you were there. No, I was saying I don't recall Notre Dame being played, which leads to my next question. Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask, because the record came out in March. We've been, no one's been able to tour. I believe I saw an acoustic performance of you playing this song, but have you been able to play this as a band to a live audience?
No, we have not been able to play one. No, and it's like I didn't
tragic. Think so because I looked online, and the reason I'm asking is I like to ask the question of, compared to your other songs, what kind of reaction does this get? But I can phrase it a little different. So you put it out, and I noticed it's only been out for 2 months. You got over 200,000 views on YouTube, which is awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's the vibe in from your fans? Do they love the song? Is it like a quote unquote hit with your fans?
It is. And I can't even express like how insanely, like, I'm like tearing up thinking about it. Just like the feedback from this album is so great and interesting in a sense of, first of all, we couldn't pick the first single, and like Fat Mike wanted a different single, and
he always does.
Yeah, he always does. But I always like want to go with like, what he, and I liked, his choice, but he had like a bit more like of a harder song. I don't know. I just in my gut wanted this one. And then it's also like some people at Fat wanted this one. And then I consulted a friend of mine, Mike Halloran, who used to work at 91X. He like broke Sublime on the radio and Blink on the radio back in the day, and kind of discovered Jewel. I don't know. I was like, okay, I'm going to ask this guy out of these 3 songs that are like, contenders for a single. And he said that one. But in how has it been received? The interesting thing is, I can't wait to, because you know what the single is, and you're kind of wrapped around that. And I trust these people's opinions, like Fat Mike Halloran, Vanessa at Fat, and Aaron and everyone at Fat. But I also, you kind of know what the fan favorites end up being after the record's been out. And in the past, I'm like, okay, everyone loves that song Jerk. And that wasn't like a single, at first. And so, yeah, it's been really well received. And the song Notre Dame particularly has been received. I don't know how to talk about it without being like, I don't know, talking about how awesome it is. I feel weird saying
well,
it. Well,
yeah, I mean, yeah, it is awesome. And again, I've been following you for a couple years now, and as I've dug into your history, you guys have been a band for a long time on paper, but really your first full length came out in 2017. So the beauty of it to me, your band, is that you guys have been around for a while, but Josh and Neil came on board. How long were they in the band before you recorded the full length in 2017?
They were in the band, both of them, like together. Neil was first, and then Josh joined. They joined in 2012, and it was like we were like, okay, now we're a band. Like I remember, I've always kind of said like Bombpops have been around for a long time. Polly and I have been writing songs since like 2008, and
Right.
when they came around, until this day, I'm like, we are finally a band that I've always wanted to be, and it's like. Neil and Josh grew
Yeah,
up together in the high desert
you
playing.
you find your missing links,
Yeah,
that
and
complete the band.
they're the dream rhythm section in the sense of they've been playing music together since they were in middle school. Like their dream was to be on Fat Records, and then here Polly and I were other kids growing up in San Diego and doing this. We have our weird language of writing music together, and then they have their more actually traditional way of explaining music because they both went to they moved out to LA to go to Musicians Institute together. They are like living their dreams being on Fat Records, and so to find that rhythm section that's like locked in for life is kind of like the golden ticket for a band. At least for
Right.
Polly
Well,
and
like
I.
what I was starting to say though, and I think is great is, you can never be a new band again. And you guys have been a band for quite a while, but at the same time, you still feel like a new band. To me, this is only the second full length record. So, you're not cursed with that, oh, they've been around forever so much. At
Yes.
least from what I see, you guys are out there, you were very well received on the Punk and Drublic tour. This track, um, when I listened to it, because I had heard it, I think online when it first came out, and listened to it, but I really, listened to it probably a dozen times in the last day or two. With this song, it's cool. I hear, like I said, obviously I hear the Bombpops. It sounds like you guys, but
Mm-hmm.
the influences, I hear Teen Idols, I hear a little bit of the Gamuts, No Use, and I hear a little bit. I don't know what it is about the lyric. It's like a little bit of Alkaline Trio. Are you a
That's
fan?
what I was waiting for. I'm doing a virtual dab.
Are
That's my
you a
favorite
fan?
band. If you put it
Okay.
it's hard to say your favorite band, but like I would say if you put a gun to my head, you don't even have to put a gun to my head.
But see,
I'll tell you,
I never heard that influence with you guys before. I would have never picked up on that until this track. That's interesting.
I don't know, we're an accumulation of and like a living embodiment of Southern California, just everything culture kind of like if you especially look at Josh and Neil and like they talk like this, they're like, yeah, bro. And it's like and Polly's like just like the blonde beach. I don't know. It's just like there's this whole thing of us, and so as we were playing, like Bomb Pop starting out, and even on the last record, Fear of Missing Out, we had this super skate punk vibe, and that's kind of I do love skate punk. I love it, and I think No Use for Name falls in that category, and No Effects and Bad Religion and Pennywise. Like I love that stuff, and so we were doing that, and it's actually harder to be. Not that it's I don't know. The songwriting for me that I wanted to get to was a point of like Alkaline Trio lyricism, but also melodies. And I think there's some crossover too with No Use for a Name. And I don't know, some of that just crosses over. But to answer your question, the reason Alkaline Trio is my favorite band is I know that I know their whole like catalog discography like the back of my hand. And I still, every week since I discovered that band when I was like 15, I listen to that band so much. And every time I listen to them, I hear something different. Like I've heard these lyrics so many times. And then even just recently, I'm like, oh my God, that's so witty on like 3 different levels. And I didn't get that one until just now.
Well, yeah, but I also want to say it's not like, and I'm glad you've been receptive to my comments about it, because some people will be like, well, I thinking you're getting accused of ripping somebody off. That's not at all, and it doesn't so much sound musically like Alkaline Trio. The vibe I'm getting and you use the word very early on in this conversation about imagery. The flames of Notre Dame. It's very something Skiba would do. He writes
Yeah.
just this abstract shit that all of a sudden, like you said, 3 years later, it dawns on you of what he's really talking about. And Matt's a genius for that. And I definitely picked up on that in here. And like I said, it's a real step up, the production, everything. And I didn't know that you work with somebody besides Chris. That was interesting.
Oh yeah, and that's a funny one too, because not a funny one. I couldn't be more happy with this team. We were set to go with Fogel from early on, and we just love working with him. I love how he is as an engineer. I love how he is as a producer. I love how he's a great hang. His wife is the great hang. His child was conceived while we were there for the first time. That's a whole nother story. And now he has two
Wow.
children. We're like, we kind of made your baby. And now you have two babies. And so like that family and that hang is just so special to us. So I don't know. We go to Denver for a reason, or we go out, we've gone to Denver twice now because we can't do it in LA. We won't focus. Somebody will go to work. Somebody will be late. Somebody will like go do whatever they have to do before being there. And it's just, we won't get the same result. And we force ourselves to be there together through the whole process, even through the parts you're not playing. And pay attention, please. Like everyone does, but like they all do. And not like I'm telling them to do that. I'm just saying they do because they want to, because they're there.
That's what makes great records, though.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of bands really, know that about, they'll be like, oh, we're just going to record at home. But there are distractions. There's relationships, wives, husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, kids. And to get out and be in a bubble and just be consumed by it and like be there, even though you aren't the bass player, and listening to the bass tracks go down, because, there's many times, that people have commented or do this, change the guitar. Our horn players will say something, hey, go to a chord here, that I wouldn't have thought of. And that's part about being in a band. And that goes back to some of the initial questions I was asking. Did you completely write this yourself? And you're like, yeah, I wrote all the lyrics and I wrote the music, but there's an evolutionary process with that. Everybody kind of puts their stamp on it in the band. It could be just a smallest suggestion of, instead of denied, make this word decay on the first verse.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so like, I, especially on this album, and that's where I've been doing a lot of acoustic stuff lately. It's the first thing I wrote this album on an acoustic guitar. Somebody told me a trick once, and it was Lawrence Katz of the Boss Tones, who produced an EP we did in 2014 called Can of Worms. It has 2 songs on it. We released it ourselves. And it was the first time he was like, okay, like your melody, it's cool, but you need to sit with this chord, strum it slow, and play with the melody, and like see if everything that you're saying fits, or melody like fits into this chord, and then on to the next one. And so how I write these songs for the Bombpops when they're coming to the table, before they come to the table, sometimes like Notre Dame, most of the time it's like Notre Dame, a verse or a chorus, like a first verse, chorus, pre-chorus, like the first part of it. I can't even finish a song until I'm stoked and like in love with all of the lyrics from that part. Then I'll be like, okay, this is a song. If I'm not stoked, or it's just not working with melody wise and lyric wise, and that first, what my message and my imagery is, I can't love it. I just can't love it. So once I get to a point where like, love it, like this enough, maybe there's a few words that I'll get to later because I'm going to procrastinate, but like I could play around with changing that. But it's going to be probably really simple because I know so well what I want to say. I can find a smarter way to say it. And then in Notre Dame's case, I'm like, okay, then great. Now I want to do the second verse, second pre-chorus and chorus. On this case of this song, the chorus doesn't change at all, like lyrically, it's the same. Part of me, sometimes I'm like, I wish I had done something a little more clever and changed the second chorus or the end chorus with a little bit of different lyrics. And I remember having that thought writing this song. And I was like, but we do that a lot. This chorus just comes a lot more often. And I'm like, I want this song to be the song where it does, like, like a copyrights or like a band. I don't know. It's just like, they just say the same thing over.
Well, a lot of times you think you're being clever, and then you look out in the audience and they're still singing the first chorus because the first chorus was the best chorus.
Yeah.
So you change the lyric to be clever and witty, and it does. So no, I think in this instance, I think you were right to take the lead you did. Not to interrupt you, real quick, going back. So when you picked up that acoustic and you started putting pen to paper, do you remember how long it took you to write this song?
So that was the quickest I've ever written a song, in terms of, I mentioned before that I had that first like verse about like Black Cat and the Plague. I had written that. I remember like I had that down. I was like, I think this is my song that I want to write about that larger like picture of a hard thing to explain. So because I always like, okay, the plague, that was a long time ago. I've been around since then. And then I couldn't get anywhere. And I remember just setting it down, and like it was the next day or maybe like 2 days later that happened, that Notre Dame burst into flames. And then I put everything down and I just dove into this song, and it like whoosh, wrote the chorus and the second verse. I went back to the first verse, I think, and I tweaked a bit of it, and bam, done. And like, to me, I was done because there are no lyrics in the bridge. And so that was, was a shorter song. And I also like came to terms like with what we just talked about. I was like, I could drag this on, but I want this. I kind of in that moment wanted to have the feeling of just being done with a song that quickly.
Yeah,
and so
and sometimes the best songs are the ones that people want to hit rewind and hear it again.
Right.
You start getting into the 3.5 minute mark, and this thing clocks in pretty quick. It's like 2:20.
Right. And that's where I was going, like saying how we bring songs to the table. So this song, I loved my melody. I didn't want to sacrifice the melody. But what it was before, there was a bit of tiny sacrifice. And it was when Yotam came to the table with this one. When I showed this one to him, he was like, here's the thing. My melody, it's like, let the flames stand on it, nothing's taking you. My verse was like, well, it seems like things have gotten worse. Yeah, I was up there at the same thing, and he was like, he's like this. He had to stop for a minute, and I was like, what's wrong with this song? He's like, well, if you're married to this lyric and this melody, to me, there's no difference between, I don't know, it just kind of sounds like the same thing. He's like, what you need to do, we need to bring you down here, and that might be a little tweaking of your melody, or I don't even know. I can't remember exactly what it was. I could look back I have all the voice memos saved through like the whole process.
I mean, basically he was going for note choices at that point. You were staying at the same register. Yeah. Which is awesome. You had that's why you use producers. You have another set of ears. Cause I don't care who you are. I don't know, unless you're Prince, he's the only one who never really had a producer. Uh-huh. You can benefit from listening to somebody else,
Yeah. And so, see, it was changing notes and changing chords. That's completely what it was. And I think we changed the key. Like, it definitely changed the key for sure. He was like, I want to see you. And his whole thing before he started working with us was, I was like, I just want to see you guys get more out of your voice. And then we were like, as a band, okay, this song needs the Noise for an Amy, like bass intro, So that kind of, that's where the intro has a very Nice for a Name thing. And it was kind of like, okay, well, let's connect those two things that like, I think a lot of our fans or fans of the genre would recognize. I certainly would pick that kind of thing out.
Well, we're going to wrap up here in a second. Thank you for taking us through the inspiration and the background of the song. I do want to ask a little fun question here before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first song you wrote and what it was called? Very first song.
I do. And what it was called was so stupid because it didn't have anything to do with the song. At the time, the phones were used the T9 predictive text. Mm-hmm. Do you remember? And so your little Nokia phone. And for some reason, somebody once said T9 word doesn't spell crunk. And I don't even remember what context it was, but I think it was like an overheard thing. And I just thought that was funny. And so we named the song that, Polly and I, and so T9 word doesn't spell crunk for so many reasons.
Cutting your teeth. It was your first thing. I get it.
But
so we're
kind of like it.
we're gonna end here. I want you to let our listeners know everything and anything that's going on in the world of Gen Pop and or the Bombpops.
Yeah.
So let them have it.
I will. Thank you. Let's see. But I do want to kind of plug my Patreon, and it's patreon.com/GenPop. I'm so happy that you invited me on to your podcast to speak about songwriting, because it started off that Patreon was about playing acoustic covers and just keeping myself busy and playing guitar. And it's turned into me sharing a lot about my songwriting process and talking about it is so different, sometimes hard to do. But a lot of people that follow me on there are songwriters, and yeah, I'm happy we bounce ideas off of each other. It's become this awesome community, and I kind of like do pre-shows with them. Like I test out stuff that I'm going to do, which I've been now doing on these bigger viewing live fests. So they've helped me so much. I can't be more thankful for that whole process and having people like along with
Awesome.
it. It forces me to do it.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to throw out there?
Last call.
Last call.
Last call. I just say, if anyone is hearing about us for the first time via this podcast, that please take a listen to our album, Death in Venice Beach. Just follow us at Instagram.com/the Bombpops. That's kind of where we're most active. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you remember that we were on Punk and Drublic tour
Of
together.
course. All right, Jen. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Cheers. Have a good one.
I thought the episode was over, so I got off the line. But Jen stayed on and shared with Chris a story you will find interesting and coincidental, no need to be vague. I'm actually pissed off I didn't hear her talk about the bubonic plague.
I know a lot about the bubonic plague because when I was a kid and I was in 7th grade, we learned about the bubonic plague. And I was so fascinated, like in a fear way, kind of fascinated, like when you first hear the Misfits and you're like, this is so bad. And like, but I like love it. And it's really interesting. Like, I don't know. I kind of had this sick obsession with the bubonic plague, but it got really real. And I don't talk about this a lot. And I'm fine talking about it now on the podcast. I don't mind it now, but it's been really until this year that I've like opened up about it. That being obsessed with the bubonic plague actually led me to have clinical OCD, like never before in my life.
Wow.
Had I had like OCD, but and it was also triggered by like I moved in 7th grade and it was nothing bad happened. I just moved, and they say like something like that, like kind of traumatic, like 7th grade, miss my friends, have to go to another middle school, like all these emotions, and then something like that happens. So the OCD like manifested itself in this completely irrational fear of the bubonic plague. And because I heard on the news that there was an outbreak in California when it's like summer and hot, there sometimes like ground squirrels, there'll be an outbreak of the bubonic plague through ground squirrels. And it's like, that's fine. You can't die of the bubonic plague. You go to the doctor and they like fix it. And
Wow.
there's a cure for the bubonic plague.
I didn't know you could still get. So you're telling me right now you could literally still get the bubonic plague?
Yeah, the bubonic plague
Wow.
does exist. It's just that there's a cure for it, and it's kind of rare, and it's not through like house pets, obviously, and like people, I don't know. There's like ways to manage flea infestations and all this stuff. So, but they do pop up in California in like ground squirrels, and then they like, I don't know, eradicate the ground squirrel population. I think that's what they actually do. But I lived by the beach. We moved to the beach in Carlsbad, and there's these ground squirrels that like burrow in the kind of like hills, like the cliffs. And I got to the point, so my OCD was so bad that I began like obsessively hand washing, like wash my hands till they bled. Like I didn't go to the beach because that's where the ground squirrels were. And then at that same time, my mom went to France. And I was like, that's where the like irrational fears,
Yeah.
And my mom went to France and came back, and she was like, and my first thought was like, that's like where the bubonic plague epicenter was, And she came back and she was like, it was so great. We stayed in this old building. It used to be a hospital for plague victims. And I was like, oh no. And like, I knew what she wore when she came back from the airport. And like, I, for no better, like, use of the phrase, avoided the clothes that she had worn like the plague.
Right.
And I'm lucky enough that I grew up with like my parents recognized what it was immediately, because actually my brother had it And so when I hid it from them, like the hand washing, like my sink wasn't clean enough to wash my hands. Like I'd have to go to, and once they realized it, they were like, nope, this is what this is. And they put me I was on Prozac like also cognitive therapy. I hated going to therapists. Like I just couldn't deal with it.
Right.
Because a therapist is always like, something must have harmed you when you were a child. And like the thought that if anyone even like suggesting that would make me so mad. I was like, no, it's just the ground squirrels.
Right.
And so I hated therapy, but like I was just so lucky to have parents that like recognized it, because my dad was a lot of like cognitive therapy. He's like, that's an irrational thought. Like it's still real that you have the fear, but but it's not going to happen,
Yeah, that's pretty lucky that your parents did recognize it, because, well, I don't know if you still have that now at all. I'm sure that you don't totally get rid of that, right? You still have to have a little bit, right?
Actually I don't. And that's the thing good. Is like, I think that like the Prozac is a miracle drug when it's prescribed for the right thing. I think it can fuck up a person if it's not needed or not used correctly, or not. It has to be used with cognitive therapy. It can't just like cure you. Right. But I was cured, and I remember I stopped taking it when I turned like 19, because I remember being like, oh, I'm going to do drugs. Like I want to do street drugs. Right. And I'm like, I can't take Prozac and do street drugs.
No, that's right.
But here's the thing that's even crazier. So think of, it all connects really quick. So that's the long-winded story of that. The bubonic plague was a childhood fear of mine. Gone. I don't do that anymore. But here we are in a pandemic.
I know.
And what the thing was that was scariest about the plague, and I remember thinking about nurses like back then and plague doctors with those awesome fucking masks, being like, okay, that's scary and awesome, but like how sad is it? Like people would die and you can't touch your loved ones. They just had to rot and decay and die while they were conscious. It's like their brain worked, but they rotted to death and like nobody could touch them. And so that was really what made me a fear came from, because I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. But then the fear of it was that. And so here we are.
So wait, let me interrupt you real quick. So you're telling me all this shit, and then are you telling me the day that you were supposed to play your album release, shit got shut down because of fucking pandemic?
But I'm about to drop it even like crazier. So the name of the album is called Death in Venice Beach. Death in Venice Beach is a name that is a play on a title of a novel, which is one of my favorite novels about the life of an artist. And it is dark. And when I tell people that it's my favorite book, I remember my dad suggested I read it when I was younger, and being like,
who's the author?
It's called Death in Venice. So the author, it's called Death in Venice by Thomas Mann, written in early 19 teens, because 1917 or something. But it takes place, and get this, in Venice, Italy, during the cholera pandemic that swept across Europe, specifically Italy. And he uses the main character. It's like kind of this fucked up situation where he gets wind of it because in Venice, Italy at the time, it's a tourist destination. So all of the there's people speaking different languages. He gets wind of it through a German newspaper, but he's lusting after this person, and it's Polish. And he's like, well, they don't know yet. He's like, he keeps this secret to himself. And also the city is kind of keeping it a secret because they don't want their tourism to go down, and they don't they kind of just ignore it until it gets really bad. And all of a sudden everyone has to flee and are dying of cholera. And so the title is based on a pandemic that started in Venice, Italy. And I just remember wow, that's cool. We wanted an LA kind of vibe title. And it's when I reread this book, I was like, Death in Venice Beach. And then it came out. Yeah. So that's fucking crazy to me. And then our album came out on Friday the 13th of March, 2020, during a pandemic. And
wow. That's so many things. That's so many times. You couldn't write that. That's stranger than fiction, That's so weird. I have fucking crazy, like, just like you told me, like that this year, like things that like timing wise are just like, what? How is that? The year, and the fact that it's the year 2020 seems really like ominous or something.
It sounds like a sci-fi title, 2020.
The Wrap with Chris and Chris.
All right, so one thing about Jen's episode that I thought was really cool and interesting to think about is how you can be inspired by something you see in the world to write music. She talked about seeing Notre Dame in flames on the news, and that inspired her to write a song. And that kind of imagery in songs really makes a song pop and paints a picture in your head. And I think that that's really cool. That goes a lot further than, a lot of times you'll hear, for lack of a better word, generic lyrics. And maybe it's just sometimes because they sing well and because they're relatable on a mass scale. But personally, I love to hear something very specific. And there's bands out there that do it so great. Like I think of like Death Cab for Cutie does it so well. And like there's just so many great examples of that. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some Less Than Jake songs. I mean, Less Than Jake are a perfect example. You guys have so much crazy good imagery in your songs. And, one song I wanted to talk to you in particular about is Scott Farkas Takes It on the Chin. And the imagery in that song that I always pops out at me is the imagery of like this circus show. You reference this circus show, and then later in the song you reference that when I think of this town right now, it's filled with speed freaks and assholes and all kinds of creeps.
When I think about this town, right now it's filled with speed freaks and assholes and all kinds of creeps, and somehow every new face in every single case in a year or two.
And that once again brings back like that circus feel, and
Yeah.
That like I told you before, that's maybe top 2, maybe number 1 favorite Less Than Jake song of mine. So I don't know. I wanted to hear your thoughts on imagery in music a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, our original drummer Vinny, who was with us for most of our time here, our career up until a couple of years ago, he wrote the bulk of the lyrics all these years, and he was my best friend growing up. We formed the band together. And he would just always be handing me these scraps of paper since I was a 15-year-old kid here. And it'd just be like random ideas. Sometimes it'd be like a full-on lyric, a full vocal. But a lot of times it was just these scraps of imagery,
Right.
And that was the beauty of creating, because he wasn't a songwriter in the sense of like picking up a guitar. He used me as his conduit. He used Roger and the rest of us to get these ideas across of what he was feeling, and it worked beautifully. A song like Scott Farkas. Honestly, we were just writing songs at such a breakneck pace. There wasn't much thought in it, like to go back to that time period and really think and analyze those lyrics. There's great imagery there, but these were just bore out of pieces of paper handed to me that, this will work over this chord arrangement.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not till years
Which
later.
Sometimes those are the best songs.
It's not till years later and you're talking about it on a podcast where you're like, wow, that was very insightful and beautiful imagery. No, it was just a scrap of paper that my friend handed to me, and then I sang it. But looking back, it's a pretty wonderful thing, man.
Well, it is, and it's just testament to how good the thoughts were and how good he was at being able to capture this imagery through words that we were able to translate into song. And again, you never thinking that it was going to resonate with listeners later on, at least this long, and we actually put that song out on a 7-inch. We released it, and then we re-recorded it for the Rockview record, and it was just kind of one of those fan favorites from the time we went out and played it. Like people loved it.
Yeah, and the other thing, like you're talking about, is it's amazing how teaming up with someone to write a song together can take something so much further than when you do it by yourself sometimes. Not to say that you can't, everybody writes great songs where they write everything. And in my band, Steve writes entire songs. Sometimes they're great and we're just like, okay, that's it. That's the song. We'll go with that. And sometimes someone else brings whole song to the table, and that's great. But I feel like the songs that are the most special to me are the ones where we all collaborated, or a couple of them. In particular, I think about this Punchline song called Green Hills, where Steve had written this part on piano that was, the lyric was, nothing's ever going to work out quite the way you think that it's going to work out. And I just thought it was really pretty. It was a really pretty piano part, and I liked the lyric, and it made me think of the fact that I was moving away from the place where it was like where I grew up. It was like a 30-acre farm, and then there was a landfill over the hill from where we lived. And then the landfill started moving towards where my family lived, and they started, I think it's called eminent domain, when they just start taking your land. And then
it is.
Yeah, and it sucked. It was a fucking landfill. And we had like this place where I grew up, and then lived there all these years, and then finally the landfill just bought my parents moved out of there. I lived next door to my my grandparents and my great grandma, who didn't even speak English. And so it was really sad moving everything out of there. So that was then I wrote the verses and gave them to Steve. And it was just all 100% imagery of things from there. There were things like I wrote lyrics about the clouds looking like animals and faces of presidents.
Soft light. The clouds look like animals and faces of presidents, lions, and the profile John F. Kennedy wrapped up in rose.
And things like very specific memories. Now when I listen to that song, every time it reminds me of this place that I can't go to anymore. But I'm so glad that I have where I grew up down in a song, because it could take me back to there. And I think that's what's so cool about imagery in songs, is that it can transport you to a place that maybe you can't visit anymore, or to a person that you can't visit anymore. So that's one of those really magical things about writing music that I love.
Oh yeah, and I've touched on this in a couple episodes now, is just the fact of the memories attached to the songs. That's why you love them so much. It takes you back to the good times, sometimes the bad times, but sometimes reliving those bad times, you're able to have a different perspective and thought process on that, 10 or 15 years removed after the fact.
Right. And speaking of that, if someone did have some you like my segue?
I love it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, if someone out there happens to not be musically inclined, but you love music, or maybe you are musically inclined and you just love Chris's music, then they can hit you up for a custom song, right?
They certainly can. I mean, if you have those songs in your head, you're not necessarily a songwriter, but you have ideas. Maybe you wrote a poem for a loved one, or just had a poem you wrote in 5th grade that you like, that you want put to song. Hit me up. I'd love to write you a custom song, jingle or voiceover for your business, podcast or brand, whatever you have in mind. I also do one-on-one live video sessions. These could be anything from musical collaborations. I could help you produce a song, work on a song lyrically, melodies, harmonies. I also answer questions about the music business. We can talk about how to get your band out there a little bit better in the social media, etc. Information on all this, please hit me up at chrisdemakes@gmail.com. You can also find me online at Instagram at @LessThanChrisD, Twitter at @LessThanChris. And please join us on our Chris DeMakes a Podcast Facebook group, and it's super easy to join. All you have to do is request what artist you'd like to see featured on Chris DeMakes a Podcast.
People should definitely join that group, and I would be really interested, if you're listening to this episode, go drop a post in there about what your favorite your favorite imagery in a song is, whether it's a Less Than Jake song or whether it's anybody's song, because I think that's an interesting thing to hear about.
Absolutely. And just want to leave our listeners today letting you know that I had been blessed so far with having friends from the punk and ska world be on the show, but I am trying to branch out to other artists and other genres that I love. So if you have any suggestions, please let us know. We'd love to get your favorite artist on here to speak about your favorite song.